Mm. Hello, teachers. Let's talk about the true mechanics of manifestation. So, right off the bat, most of what's being peddled in the world is just that it's a pyramid scheme. And if you're here and you are in consciousness, you know that. So, we're going to very briefly talk about the mechanics of mind, the mechanics of psyche, and the conversation will lead where it leads. But first, we need to completely disabuse ourselves of the falseness. So, first of all, the word manifestation means to make with the hands. And what it is, in the most physical sense, is a thought, there's a reification, there's an image. You have an image of a wheel, right? Basically, you have an image of a particular tool. You have an image of a house, of a structure, of a process of physics. And then you take the hands and you use them to craft whatever needs to be crafted, derived from the psychological blueprint, the image of thought, which is called the reification, right? So manifestation and realization, not in the English usage of the word, but in most Indo-European languages, Spanish for example, also French and Italian, the word realize, realizar, to realize, means to make real with the hands. So on the most basic of level, that's what it means. When it comes to the way that we use it, that the so-called spiritual community uses it, and keep in mind, it's a technique that's often sold in the same way that most workout and exercise techniques are sold. People are sad, people are lonely, people feel unfulfilled, they're not getting what they want, they're too whatever. And all somebody has to do is get online and say, hey, you, are you fat? Are you lonely? Are you not getting laid? Let me teach you how with this very simple fat burning exercise based in the latest science. And then, with that charisma, that enthusiasm, they sell you some bullshit that doesn't work, or it's based in half science or half truth. And, because people are lonely and desperate, they eat it up. And, they're always promising you a quick and easy fix. And so it's a really easy thing to sell. And it's the exact same way, it's the exact same kind of pyramid scheme that is pushed, peddled in the so-called manifestation community. Most of what's being taught is it's partially incorrect science. And so people will often lead in, whatever the hook is, right? Are you not getting what you want? Do you want the car? Do you want the house? Do you want the girl? Let me teach you how. And it's like, oh my God. And so it's just more exploitation, but in the guise of spirituality. And it's not only teaching you to, it's just furthering your desire, the egotistical, the narcissistic desire, the programmed desire to exploit life, to exploit other people magically, mystically, allegedly, metaphysically, but also it's an attempt to exploit the cosmos, right? But it's also exploiting you, because they're exploiting you. They're siphoning from you by catching you in your place of self-loathing, self-hatred, dissatisfaction, and it's just another vampiristic mode of conducting oneself in the world. They're vampirizing you and they're teaching you how to vampirize others, and it's absolutely to no end. So when you see very clearly what thought is, and this is where we have to go, actually looking at the nature of thought, not deluding yourself or bullshitting yourself whatsoever. So very, very simply, thought is a veil. It's a cover. Thought, which is here as an element, just as thought, and you can take it and you can shape it and mold it into any form that you'd like within a fourth dimensional framework, because thought is fourth dimensional. It runs in the fourth dimension. The fourth dimension is a very, very simple, it's a very basic elementary dimension. Its bandwidth is literally that. It has an incredibly small bandwidth. There are dimensions much higher than the fourth dimension, and thought has absolutely nothing to do with those dimensions. not human thought. It has nothing to do with those dimensions whatsoever. The entire dimension of human thought is glamour. It's glamour. Thought, which is fourth dimensional, can only work in the third, second, and first dimensions. It can only drop down. It can't go up. Dimensional capacity cannot reach up. It can only reach down. You understand what I'm saying, right? The first dimension is a dot that cannot transfer upward into the second dimension. The first dimension cannot perceive the second dimension, but the second dimension is built of the first dimension, intersecting with itself, basically, to put it like that, right? A single point, a single dot, first dimension. Take a bunch of dots, line, right? Or dot, make a line, right? Second dimension, right? Or, a little box, right? And then you take, two of those boxes and you intersect them like that, then you get the third dimension, right? This physical dimension in which we find our bodies existing. And the fourth dimension is time, space, and thought. And so the second dimension can only perceive with second dimensional vision. So if the second dimension were to perceive the third dimension, it can only see it as second dimensional. It's only from within the third dimension that you can perceive three-dimensionally. And so the third dimension can't perceive the fourth dimension. How could it? Because the fourth dimension is time, space, and thought, which are the same thing, time, space, and thought. But time, space, and thought, they have their apparent influence over the third dimension, which has its apparent influence over the second and its apparent influence over the first. Why? Because of perception. The first cannot see the second, but the second can see the first. The second cannot see the third, but the third can see the second. And the third cannot see the fourth, but the fourth can see the third, right? And so there's an upward trajectory like that. So very, very quickly, I'm not going to go super into this right now, but the fifth dimension, there's a lot of talk about jumping from the third dimension to the fifth dimension. This is not true. This is a contrived way of speaking that people have borrowed from the popular jargon. There's no moving from the third dimension to the fifth dimension. The fifth dimension, insofar as how we're describing it in the inner sciences consciously, the fifth dimension is dimension 0. What does that mean? The fifth dimension is what, to use a Sanskrit word, would be the Akashic dimension. The fifth element is the Akash. The fifth dimension is the Akashic dimension. It's pure information. What that means is that it's everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. And so the entirety of the fifth dimension is every information about every bit of information. That means physically, energetically, everything. Information just means raw information, not psychological data. We have a contrived understanding of information and data based upon psychological knowledge, but actual information. A single drop, if you will, a single point of the Akash. And a point is all it is. It's a tiny point, but it's also everywhere. It's everywhere and nowhere. But the entirety of it is contained in every single point of it, every single drop of it. And so it contains all the information about time, space, everything in all dimensions, from the beginning of time to the end of time. And so it's beyond time. It contains all time and all information of all time, all measured things whatsoever, and from any dimensional perspective, are contained therein. That's the fifth dimension. So it's also called dimension 0. So if you're actually counting, we say that there are 11 physical dimensions, but we number them 1 through 12 because the fifth dimension is not physical. And so the nominal, if you're going to count that dimension as the fifth, it becomes the nominal 12th dimension, which is actually the 11th dimension. And so, do you see what I'm saying? So, don't get lost in that. Put all that aside right now. The point is that you're moving not from the third dimension to the fifth dimension. That's not possible. You become aware of the fifth dimension, and in your awareness of the fifth dimension, the fourth dimension is dissolved. It's left behind, and you step into the sixth dimension. The sixth dimension is the timeless mind. It's the kingdom of heaven. It's paradise realized in here. It's Christ consciousness. And fourth dimension is hell. That's the ego mind. And the ego is narcissistic. There's no such thing as a non-narcissistic ego. The ego is a virus. Ego consciousness is a virus. So just, do you see that? You see it clearly? It's a virus. It's a lie. It's an illusion. It's a falsehood that keeps violence in perpetuity, that keeps division in perpetuity. It's a lie. And it's an illusion. It's a shadow. It's a mirage. It's not even real. It's a falsehood pretending to be real. And there's so much apologetics, going on in the name of it. There's so much rationalization and justification, but that's the narcissistic ego trying to rationalize and justify itself in order to, I can stick around, right? No, it's an illusion. It's false. It's built of thought, and it's an attempt to defy the physics of thought. It's resistance against the natural physics of thought, which is to build something, utilize that structure of thought, and then let it fade back into the sands of time. Let it fade back into the raw elemental suchness of thought. You don't carry thought structures around on top of your head. That's how you get sick. And you don't need to anyway. You just let them go, and when you need thought again, you construct it into what you'd like. And there's a whole memory bank in the Akash itself, which is everywhere, holds every bit of information. So you don't have to try to remember all these thought forms. You don't have to try to remember anything. Something is built, and anyway, the blueprint of what is built is already coming from the Akash, and it returns back to the Akash. So all thought forms, every structure of memory, every structure of any kind whatsoever is stored in the Akash. You can think of it like the cloud, and when you need it, you pull it out of the cloud. And the blueprint is in there, and like I said, all blueprints for everything, anytime, anywhere, any dimension, are all right here on the tip of my finger. That's how the nature of the Akashic of the fifth dimension works. And so it's from that dimension that all the blueprints are pulled, and thought is that which gives form and shape and structure to that in the fourth dimension, so that third dimension manipulation, which just means moving, manipulation means to move about with the hands. A manifestation can occur. And so there's a blueprint of thought. The blueprint comes in from the Akash, thought gives it shape and form, and then it's the hands that then take that mental blueprint and then make something with it, whatever it is, clothing, a desk, the phone, the bed, the house, all of that. And so that's the flow down. And so when you have an image of yourself, an idea about concepts of who you are and who somebody else is and what God is and what consciousness is and what death is and what life is, you have all these philosophies, these images, these concepts, these ideologies. That's all fourth dimensional. And when you hold on to that and you get stuck in that place and you think that's actually who you are, that you are an actual discrete object, separate from life, separate from consciousness, separate from love, separate from death, separate from anything. And so you see that death is some point out there or some point out there, or that love is some point out there, or that peace or consciousness or God is some point or some goal out there. You're in confusion created by the fourth dimensional programming, which is the continuity of a thought structure that you call myself. And you can only have a thought structure called myself, my ego, if you have ideas of thought structures and images and concepts that you would call that person and that person and that thing and so on and so on. And so it all goes together. You can't have an ego or an image about yourself if you don't have an image about somebody else. And if you drop your images of everybody else, you naturally have to drop your image of yourself. And then you return to consciousness, which we would call Christ consciousness, the sixth dimension. And so you can't take anything with you into the sixth dimension, but in seeing the nature of the fifth dimension, you see what the fourth dimension is not. Because before you are aware of the nature of the fifth dimension, you only know the fourth dimension from the limited perspective of the ego consciousness, which is a distortion, it's a lie, it's a mirage. It's the source of our violence and our suffering as human beings. And so when you actually see that, you see the nature of the fifth dimension, then you pop over into the sixth dimension. You pop into Christ, you return to your natural state. And then you see that every life is a playground, right? And then in that you clearly see that thought is an illusion. What thought creates is an illusion. All the ideas, the concepts, the ideologies of thought, all the philosophies, all the religious structures, And all philosophies, all ideologies, all concepts, all ideas, all thought is false. It's a lie, it's an illusion, it's not true, it has nothing to do with truth, could never have anything to do with truth whatsoever. And so when you're stuck in ego consciousness, all you know is thought. And so thought seems to be all important. And thought is a veil. And of course, if you're constantly then, what you see is that thought, which is not is the same thing as emotion. Thought and emotion are one, and they're also a form of energy like everything else. You see that what you have, there's a physical body, there's an energy body, a bioelectrical magnetic energy body, and then there's the thought body or the mental body. And the mental body influences the energy body, which influences the physical body. And so if you have so then you could say the shittier your thought system, or the more, and all thought systems are corrupt, but if you have the more viscerally nasty one's ego conscious is, the more that distorts the brain, the more it distorts the energy body, the more it distorts the physical body. And so it is true that what you could call improper belief, and all belief is improper and false because the reality is seen beyond belief. But if you have a all thought structure, all ego structure is by its nature toxic. However fast the drip is happening into the system, is another matter, but it's still a toxic drip. Whether you're dripping 1 drop of toxin every hour or 20,000 drops of toxin every hour, it's still toxin, right? And so there's really ultimately no justifying it. But the more sinister directly your thought structures are, which you've adopted because you feel like it gets you something in the world, the more then your emotional structures are toxified, your energetic structures then are toxified, it toxifies the body, it causes you to walk in an improper way, to sit, stand, breathe, eat, speak, watch, listen, everything, right? And so in that sense, people say your thought creates your reality. In that sense, yeah, it creates a veneer over what actually is. And when you're caught in thought, when you're caught in ego consciousness, all you can do is run that program. And so some people in their ego consciousness, they program their subconscious, right, to, be a gym junkie and to eat health foods and to, only ever smile and, in that kind of golden retriever contrived way, right? And to always, say hello and to always be polite. And there's nothing wrong with it's not that there's something wrong with that if it's conscious, but even if you use your subconscious mind to program good habits and good thoughts, you're still a slave on a track. And so you might be keeping your body at a certain kind of fitness, and you might be keeping things in a so-called positive way out here, but it's still empty and vain. And there will still always be a feeling of emptiness, a feeling of insufficiency, and no actual capacity to really go deeper than superficiality. And if you know people like that, there has to be a certain maintenance of a very superficial thin film, and if that film is burst, they get very uncomfortable and can't handle it, right? And on the other end, right, and that may seem more innocuous, but if everybody were like that, it would still be a problem. And so when you come over to the other extreme end, where the subconscious programming and therefore the ego structure is just very vicious and cruel and just exploitative and abusive and violent and just what you would call very sociopathic or psychotic, just narcissistic, not caring, not giving a fuck, just destroy everything because it's all about me and what I want and right, that sort of thing, right? When people are in that particular state of ego consciousness, it's obvious, because then there's no way of in that place of really genuinely deeply taking care of the self. And of course there are all manner of what you could say a spectrum in between the two, because there are people who are very destructive and very cruel and brutal, and yet who hit the gym and eat organically and whatever, and so there's a spectrum between the two, but it's all within the realm. Wherever you perceive there to be a spectrum of polarity, you're dealing with the realm of ego consciousness. Always, you're dealing with thought form, because there only appears to be a spectrum of polarity within the 4th dimension. Beyond the 4th dimension, when you get into the 6th dimension, which is first you must perceive the 5th, and you can't be in the 5th is everywhere and nowhere. Nowhere because it's nowhere in particular, it's everywhere at once. And so when you perceive the nature of that, which is to perceive the nature of God, the omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence of God, that it is everything and nothing, when you perceive that, and that nothing is everything, everything is nothing, not as some cute little philosophy, but you see the actualness of it, then you actually have a visceral clicking over, you could say experience, but a jump. You make that leap into the sixth dimension. And that's Christ consciousness. And you see it clearly, and it's like, whoa, hey, welcome to the party. And you see, you can viscerally see people who are caught in the confines in the prison cell of the fourth dimension, and the fourth dimension is hell, the sixth dimension is heaven, and they're both right here and right now. But the fourth dimension is the time-bound mind. The sixth dimension is this is six in American Sign Language. The sixth dimension is the kingdom of heaven. It's Christ consciousness or Krishna consciousness, however you'd like to call it. And so I'm saying all of this because most of what gets sold in the so-called manifestation community, which is just, again, it's like selling workout routines, it's the exact same kind of thing. What's being sold is the idea of ego manifestation. Your bad thoughts make you sick, right? So your good thoughts will make you well. And it's like, to a degree, up to a point. But while that begins to get on the right track of healing, health, and wholeness, rather than wholeness or health or healing being the mainstay of what's talked about and what's delivered, which is obviously what one who is sane would want to do, if you ask me, and really, it's, what you see. When you come into the nature of a wholeness, you see that's what everybody wants and it's what they need immediately. And so to hold that out on people by saying, if you just, reconfigure your thoughts and think about the house you want, it'll come. Or you think about the partner that you want and they'll come. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. That's one, it's not true, it's deceptive. And so it may appear to work in a very small amount of people, and there are a couple of reasons why that might be. But most people are going to go, it's not working. And obviously not. Because thought, right, dimensions, they work in a downward way, not in an upward. There's no upward flow to thought. Thought is a fourth dimensional activity. It cannot go beyond the fourth dimension. You really have to see that. Thought is glamour. Thought is the basis of glamour, which is what you would call, dark magic, if I can use that term, right? Which is manipulation. It's, cursing, hexing, ego. Ego is fourth dimension. And so when people are trying to use so-called metaphysical knowledge or metaphysical techniques to using their thought, and therefore different activities they engage in, like ritual activities to summon things to them, in that kind of sense, what they're doing is using thought, they're using fourth dimension. And what you don't see is that the fourth dimension does have, to a degree, the capacity to affect and influence the third dimension. Obviously. It's the fourth dimension which conceives tools, and then those tools are used to affect the third dimension. Obviously. But if you're actually talking about, summoning something from the void, no, thought only has the capacity to move around what's already manifest. It doesn't have the capacity to manifest the unmanifest. You have to go beyond thought for that. And anyway, it's not you that can go beyond thought. So here's where everything falls apart in what gets sold in the manifestation circles. There is no you. When you... right? We're speaking language, and so we have to talk about you or I, because that's how language functions. Otherwise, we would just sit here in silence. So I hope you can hear what I'm saying through the veil of the words, right? And there's no way for there not to be a veil of words as long as we're speaking. So please, just listen carefully. When you move into Christ consciousness, when you step into the sixth dimension, what you see is that the you that you thought you were, and the you that everyone thinks they are, which is the fourth dimensional object, the fourth dimensional subject object, which is made of thought, made of concepts, that one thinks it's in control, that one thinks it has power, and that one wants power and control. When you step into the sixth dimension, you see clearly beyond any doubt whatsoever that the fourth dimensional self, you see the nature of the fourth dimensional self, you see it actually has no real power. It has no real control. It only has the illusion of power and control. And everything it tries to do in order to gain more power and control is an act of violence. It's an act of exploitation against the body, against the being, and against all people and against all life. And so it is a virus of exploitation that has no redeemable qualities whatsoever. So when you see then clearly that what you actually need is already what you actually need is known by the soul, which is inseparable from God, from the source of creation. They're one. And so you always get what you need. And if you're living in the soul, as the soul purely, then your mind, body, and thought and emotion come into total alignment and all are working toward one purpose. If you want to say toward one purpose, it's a funny way of putting it almost, but they all come into alignment, and you are simply here living as embodied truth, and everything you do is in the direction, in the name of that, for the sake of the well-being of the whole of humanity. And in that line of work, the physical body manifests here on the planet in alignment, doing the work that you're here to do for the sake of the well-being of all of humanity, which is to tell the truth so as to end the suffering. In that line of alignment of work, then whatever you actually need to complete your task will come to you by the grace and the very nature, the very virtue of the fact of the intelligence of the source of creation and what it is. So it's not you manifesting anything. It's the soul calling itself to itself when it's in alignment with itself. And that has nothing to do with your thought. It has nothing to do with your emotion. Thought and emotion are the tools, are the slaves of the soul, not the other way around. Thought and emotion have no power to command the soul. That's ego. And so when you people say, I'm a manifester, and that's a contrived way of talking. Everybody is manifesting. The soul is always manifesting. The soul manifests the body. The soul manifests the mind, what you call the mind. The soul manifests the energy body, the energy field. The soul and God are one, and it's God that manifests everything, that calls everything forth and calls everything back. And so there's no separate ego, which is the co-creator with God. That's an illusion. The ego doesn't create anything but illusion. When the ego consciousness is gone and out of the way, you see there is only God. And God does all the creating. That's why it's been said, God is the one, or consciousness or God is the one without the two. There's no partner. And that's said because you can't co-conspire with God. You can't co-create with the source of creation, because the you that you would say is the co-creator is just the ego consciousness, which isn't